I wasn't stabbed in the back by an enemy, a rival, or a stranger. I was emotionally dismantled piece by piece in public by the one person who gave me life just so she could feel powerful. My greatest tormentor was my own mother. My name is Audrey, and for years I accepted this as my reality. But at our last family reunion, something inside me finally broke. Or maybe it was finally built. Before I share the story of that night, I just want to feel that someone is listening. If you are here with me, please write listening in the comments and tell me where you're from. I love hearing how far my story reaches. It's a small thing, but it helps bridge the silence. This story is for anyone who is tired of being the villain in someone else's narrative. I hope you'll subscribe. Your presence here makes me feel like I'm finally telling my story to a jury of my peers. Thank you. And now, let me set the scene. It all started as it always did, with a summons disguised as an invitation. The silence of my workshop was my sanctuary. It was a clean, quiet world of precision and truth, a world I controlled. Under the cool white light of my microscope, a Muso emerald glowed a deep forest green. To the naked eye, it was near perfect. But under my lens, its heart was revealed a delicate feather-like inclusion, a tiny fissure that told the story of its violent birth millions of years ago. My job is to see the truth hidden inside beautiful things. It's a skill that has earned me a reputation. In my family, however, it's a liability. The peace was shattered by the shrill ring of my office phone. I knew before I even looked. It wouldn't be my mother, Eleanor. She hadn't directly called me in years. She had people for that. Audrey Pierce's office. I answered, my voice neutral. Audrey, it's Beatrice. The voice was crisp, efficient, and devoid of warmth. Beatrice was my mother's executive assistant, a woman with a spine of steel and the feigned politeness of a luxury hotel concierge. I'm calling on behalf of Mrs. Pierce regarding the Pierce Family Foundation Gala next Saturday, the annual reunion. My stomach tightened. Beatrice, good to hear from you. Unfortunately, I have a prior commitment in New York that weekend, a private appraisal. I won't be able to make it. It was a lie, and we both knew it. There was a beat of silence on the other end, the kind that wasn't empty, but was, instead, filled with the weight of an uncoiling threat. I see, Beatrice said, her tone shifting from polite to pointed. Mrs. Pierce was very clear in her instructions. With Senator Collins attending as the guest of honor this year, she stressed that it is paramount for the entire family to present a united front for the donors. There it was. It wasn't an invitation. It was a casting call. I wasn't her daughter, a cherished guest. I was a prop required to complete a picture of family unity for the investors. To refuse wasn't just a personal slight. It was an act of defiance against the family brand. I closed my eyes, picturing the fallout of refusal, the string of icy text messages from my mother, the disappointed call from my father, pleading for me to just keep the peace. The smug lecture from my brother Julian about my selfishness. The exhaustion of attending would be immense, but the exhaustion of resisting would be worse. It always was. Of course, I said the words, tasting like ash. I'll rearrange my schedule. Please let my mother know I'll be there. Wonderful. Beatrice chirped, the warmth instantly returning to her voice now that I had complied. Mrs. Pierce will be so pleased. She hung up. The silence of my workshop rushed back in, but it was different now. It was heavy, contaminated. My eyes drifted back to the microscope, to the beautiful flawed emerald. Some inclusions could be polished around minimized, but others were structural, deep within the stone's core. They didn't cause any problems on the surface. They just waited silently for the right amount of pressure, in just the right place, to crack the whole thing wide open. Seacliff Manor didn't welcome you. It appraised you. Driving through the massive wrought iron gates a week later, I felt the familiar weight of its judgment. The estate, our family's Newport summer cottage, was a Gilded Age behemoth of stone and slate, perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. The lawns were manicured into perfect emerald diamonds. The hedges were sculpted into oppressive geometric walls. It wasn't a home, it was a fortress, built to keep the untidy parts of the world out. And I often felt to keep the untidy parts of its family in. My older brother Julian was the first to greet me in the grand entryway. He was wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than my car, his golden hair perfectly coiffed. "Audrey," he said, pulling me into a hug that was all shoulder pats and air. It lasted less than 3 seconds. "Glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it," I lied. His wife Charlotte drifted over her smile as brittle and flawless as the diamond necklace she wore. "Audrey, you look well." In her world, that was the equivalent of saying my dress was tragically plain. My mother, Eleanor Pierce, made her entrance, as she always did, by simply standing still, until the room reoriented itself around her. She was across the hall, captivating a state senator, with a story, her laughter, like the chime of a crystal bell. She saw me, and with a subtle flick of her wrist, summoned me over. The greeting had to be a performance, witnessed by someone important. She turned as I approached, offering me a cheek that smelled of Chanel and power. Her lips brushed the air an inch from my face. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, swept over me from head to toe. "Audrey, darling," she said, her voice a warm caress. "You look so minimalist. I had hoped you'd choose something a little more festive to show our guests how much we appreciate their generosity." It was a masterclass in her art form, a public critique disguised as a gentle suggestion, a reminder that my very appearance was a reflection on her. Before the sting could fully register, a warm voice cut in. "Audrey, my dear, marvelous to see you." It was Robert Abernathy, a family friend and a serious collector whose opinion actually mattered in the world. He took my hand, his eyes genuinely sparkling. "I just saw that feature on you in Forbes. Your analysis of the Romanov sapphire was absolutely brilliant. You're becoming a real star in the field." For a single, breathtaking moment, I felt a surge of warmth, validation. In this house in front of my mother, it was a feeling as rare as a perfect, colorless diamond. I opened my mouth to thank him, to feel the pride of my accomplishment. But Eleanor's laughter, light and sharp, sliced through the air before I could speak. "Oh, Robert, you're far too kind," she said, waving a dismissive diamond-clad hand. "It was just a little mention on their website, wasn't it? Dear, a fun little hobby you have." And just like that, it was gone. In a single sentence, she had demoted my career to a trifle downgraded Forbes, to a blog, and erased my achievement. Mr. Abernathy looked momentarily confused by the discrepancy, but was too polite to question his hostess. He smiled, offered a platitude, and moved on. I was left standing there, the ghost of his praise turning to ash in the air around me. My mother had already turned back to the senator, her performance complete. She hadn't just corrected the record. She had rewritten it, ensuring that in her story, I would never be allowed to shine. Before the main wave of guests arrived for the gala, there was the obligatory tour for the core family through the West Gallery. It was a long hall lined with portraits of Pierce ancestors, a silent testament to the lineage my mother held so sacred. The latest edition, hanging in the most prominent spot, was a new portrait of Eleanor herself, depicted in a way that was more regal than maternal. My father, a man who had faded into a well-dressed ghost years ago, trailed behind the group, his expression unreadable. My younger cousin Chloe, still blessedly untouched by the family's deeper cynicism, was admiring the new portrait. Her eyes then drifted to the subject herself. Eleanor was wearing the family's most famous heirloom, a Victorian locket with a sizable diamond at its center, said to have been a gift from a railroad tycoon. Aunt Eleanor. It's so beautiful, Chloe said before turning to me, her eyes wide with innocent curiosity. Audrey is the diamond real. You're the expert, you'd know right away. The air in the gallery grew still. Every eye turned to me. My father flinched slightly. Julian, standing beside the portrait of our grandfather, wore a smirk that was pure provocation. This was a test. My mind flashed back 13 years. I was 15, just given my first professional jeweler's loupe for my birthday. Full of pride and curiosity, I'd asked to see the locket. My mother, amused, had indulged me. I remembered the sickening drop in my stomach as I saw it clearly. Not the natural inclusions of a real diamond, but the telltale perfect edges and unnatural sparkle of high-grade cubic zirconia. It was a fake. When I tried to tell my mother, thinking I was helping, her face had transformed. She'd grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin, and hissed, "You will not ruin your grandmother's memory with your unpleasant little facts. Some things are more important than the literal truth." Now, standing in the gallery, I saw that same warning in her eyes. It was a cold, silent command. Tell the truth and start a war, or play your part and maintain the beautiful lie. It was a chance to connect with Chloe, to share a piece of my real self. It was a chance I knew I couldn't take. I forced a professional, empty smile. "With family heirlooms like this," I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears, "their greatest value is always sentimental." Chloe's face fell with a flicker of disappointment. She'd asked for a fact, and I'd given her an evasion. Across the room, Julian's smirk widened, and my mother gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod of approval. Her victory was complete. I had passed her loyalty test, but in doing so, I had betrayed myself, reinforcing the family's first and most important rule: the performance is everything. The truth is nothing. The gala was now in full swing, a swirling sea of tuxedos, silk gowns, and the constant clinking of champagne glasses. I tried to make myself invisible, finding a quiet spot near the back of the grand ballroom, watching my mother command the room with the effortless grace of a seasoned monarch. The main event of the evening was the auction. Eleanor took the stage a spotlight, making the diamonds on her neck and wrists burst into fractured fire. She began to speak about the centerpiece item, a magnificent 50-carat diamond necklace, which she had named the Star of Hope. With a voice filled with practiced emotion, she wove a story for the crowd. She spoke of a noble European family fleeing war, selling their last precious treasure to fund a new life in America, a treasure that had now been generously donated to the Pierce Foundation to build a new children's hospital wing. The story was beautiful, tragic, and inspiring. The room was captivated, but I was frozen. My blood ran cold. I recognized that necklace. A client had considered acquiring it 6 months ago. I had done the appraisal. The story my mother was telling was a complete fabrication. The diamond wasn't from a noble family. It was from a notoriously controversial African mine, its history murky, and its certificate likely doctored. It was a conflict stone polished and wrapped in a pretty lie for public consumption. Its value had been grossly inflated for the auction, turning a charitable act into a deceptive marketing ploy. My professional ethics screamed at me. This was a fraud unfolding on a massive scale, and I was the only person in the room who knew it. As if sensing my internal crisis, Julian appeared at my side. He leaned in close, his voice a smug whisper against my ear. Incredible, isn't she, Mom? Has a flawless eye for value. It wasn't a compliment. It was a challenge, a taunt. He was enjoying the impossible position I was in. To stay silent was to be complicit in a lie that went against everything I stood for. To speak up would be to detonate a bomb, destroying my mother's reputation, the foundation's biggest fundraiser, and any last frayed thread connecting me to my family. On stage, the auctioneer began. Let's start the bidding. For the magnificent star of hope, do I hear $10 million? The entire room seemed to hold its breath. A local news crew's camera panned across the audience, its red lights sweeping over the anxious, excited faces. It passed over me, and for a second, I felt like a deer caught in the headlights. I sat perfectly still, my face a mask of polite neutrality. But inside, a Category 5 hurricane was raging. $10 million going once, the auctioneer's voice boomed. My world narrowed to a single, paralyzing choice. The auctioneer's voice echoed in the cavernous ballroom, but I barely heard him. $10 million going once. The words were distant, unreal. My entire world had narrowed to the conflict raging within me, a silent, vicious war between my professional integrity and my instinct for familial survival. To speak was to detonate a bomb. To stay silent was to swallow poison. But my profession had taught me a third option. It's not always about shouting or staying quiet. Sometimes it's about applying precise pressure to an unseen fault line. My movements were fluid, almost imperceptible. I kept my eyes fixed on the stage, a mask of polite interest on my face, while my hands moved beneath the table. My thumb flew across the screen of my phone, finding Robert Abernathy's contact information. My message was short, clinical, and devoid of emotion. Mr. Abernathy, regarding the Star of Hope. Provenance is questionable, and the appraisal report has significant inconsistencies. Advise extreme caution. Happy to provide details privately. Sincerely, Audrey Pierce. I hit send. Then I placed my phone face down on the table and folded my hands in my lap, my heart hammering against my ribs. I watched him. Across the room, a soft glow illuminated Mr. Abernathy's face as he read the message. His polite smile faltered, replaced by a shrewd, serious expression. He looked up, his eyes quickly scanning the room before briefly meeting mine with a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. He didn't cause a scene. He simply turned to the billionaire industrialist sitting beside him, a man who had been enthusiastically raising his paddle, and whispered something in his ear. The industrialist's paddle, which had been halfway in the air, slowly lowered. A ripple effect. A few other major bidders, savvy players, who watched the room as much as the stage, noticed the two biggest sharks suddenly lose interest. The bidding, which had been rapid fire and energetic, began to sputter. The auctioneer tried to inject more excitement into his voice, but the momentum was gone. The energy had bled out of the room. The Star of Hope ended up selling for just over the opening bid to an unknown buyer represented by a proxy. My mother's triumphant centerpiece had fizzled. A public catastrophe had been averted, but I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that I had not escaped the consequences. I had simply redirected the explosion from a public spectacle to a private execution. I felt a small, hollow victory. I had protected the integrity of the market. I had saved my family's foundation from being attached to a fraud. I had done the right thing, the smart thing. Eleanor stepped down from the stage, her smile cemented in place, as she accepted congratulations from guests who didn't know any better. But as she moved through the crowd, her eyes found mine. They were not the eyes of a grateful mother. They were chips of ice. When she finally reached me, her voice was a low hiss, a venomous whisper meant only for me. The library. Now. The library at Seacliff Manor was a room built for intimidation, with dark mahogany walls, towering bookshelves, and the faint smell of old leather and secrets. Julian stood by the closed door, his arms crossed a smug sentinel. My mother paced in front of the cold fireplace like a caged leopard. "What did you do?" she spat, her public grace stripped away to reveal the raw fury beneath. "I have no idea what you're talking about," I said, my voice steady. "Don't you dare lie to me." Her voice cracked like a whip. "I saw you. I saw you on your phone, and a second later, Robert Abernathy pulls out. You sank it. You deliberately and maliciously sank my auction. The diamond was a fraud," I said quietly. "The story was a lie. The certificate was forged. I was trying to protect you, to protect the foundation." She laughed, a sound utterly devoid of humor. It was the sound of shattering glass. "Protect me. You embarrassed me. You cost the foundation millions of dollars because you couldn't stand to see me succeed. You have always been this way, a toxic little anchor of negativity I have had to drag through my life." She stepped closer, her face a mask of contempt. "You'll pay for this, Audrey. I promise you tonight is far from over." I left the library feeling like I'd just survived a plane crash only to find myself stranded in the wreckage. My limbs were trembling, my mind numb. The party was still in full swing outside the library doors, the sound of laughter and music, a cruel alien noise. I needed air. I slipped out onto the stone terrace overlooking the ocean. The cold, salty wind was a welcome shock, snapping at my face and clearing some of the fog from my brain. I leaned against the balustrade, watching the dark, churning waves crash against the cliffs below. I felt a kinship with them, all that hidden violence beneath a glittering surface. From here, through the grand French doors, the party looked like a silent film, a pantomime of happiness. I had never felt so alone. The door creaked open behind me. I braced myself for Julian or my mother returning to twist the knife. "Audrey." The voice was soft, hesitant. It was my cousin Chloe. She was holding 2 glasses of champagne. "I thought you might need this." I took the glass, my hand shaking slightly. "Thanks, Chloe." She stood beside me, not speaking for a moment, just looking out at the dark water. "I'm sorry about what happened in the gallery earlier," she said finally. "About the locket." The look on Aunt Eleanor's face. It was terrifying. She shivered, though I wasn't sure it was from the cold. It's always like that, isn't it? Like walking on a thin sheet of ice. You're always afraid you'll say the wrong thing and fall through. Her words, so simple and true, were a lifeline. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. She was only 19, still navigating The treacherous currents of this family. Yes, I said the admission. A profound relief. That's exactly what it's like. For the first time all night, I had a real conversation. She asked about my work in the city not as a hobby, but with genuine interest. I asked about her art classes. We talked about the suffocating pressure to be perfect, the feeling that you were always being measured and found wanting. I didn't tell her about the diamond or the scene in the library. I didn't have to. She understood the climate of fear we both lived in. You know, she said, turning to me, her eyes serious, what you did in there when you didn't answer my question about the locket. That was brave. I would have been too scared. It didn't feel brave, I confessed. It was she insisted, and she reached out and briefly squeezed my hand. You're not alone in this, Audrey. A genuine smile touched my lips for the first time that night. It felt foreign, like a muscle I hadn't used in years. Maybe she was right. Maybe I wasn't entirely alone. For a fleeting moment, I felt a spark of hope. The thought that maybe the next generation, her generation, could break this toxic cycle. Unseen by either of us from the shadows of the doorway leading to the ballroom, my brother Julian watched our moment of connection, his expression hardening into a look of cold calculation. When Chloe and I stepped back inside, the warmth of the ballroom felt artificial and cloying. We were intercepted almost immediately. Eleanor materialized before us, her smile as bright and hard as the chandelier above. Chloe, darling, your parents have been looking for you, she said, her voice dripping with honey. She placed a hand on Chloe's arm, a gesture that looked affectionate, but was clearly meant to steer her away. Don't let your cousin Audrey monopolize you. She's having a rather sensitive evening. She pulled Chloe a few steps away, but her voice carried deliberately pitched for me to hear. Her tone was one of deep, feigned concern. I know you admire Audrey, sweetheart, but you must be careful. Jealousy is a terrible thing. Sometimes, when a person doesn't feel successful themselves, they try to tear down the success of others, like the unfortunate business with the auction tonight. The words hit me like a physical blow. She had done it. She had taken my act of professional integrity and reframed it as a petty emotional outburst born of envy. She had painted me as the villain. I saw the poison take root. A little later, I tried to catch Chloe's eye across the room to share a small conspiratorial smile, but she avoided my gaze. When I approached her near the string quartet, she became flustered, mumbled an excuse about needing to find her father, and quickly walked away. The open, trusting look she'd given me on the terrace was gone, replaced by a guarded confusion, a hint of suspicion. The hope that had sparked within me just a half hour before was extinguished, leaving behind a cold, dark void. My mother hadn't just neutralized a potential ally. She had turned her against me, reinforcing the narrative that I was unstable, difficult, and malicious. Julian chose that moment to slide up next to me, a glass of scotch in his hand. He took a sip, a smug smirk playing on his lips. See? He said, his voice low and cutting. Sooner or later, everyone sees you for who you really are. A bitter little saboteur who gets off on finding flaws in everything. The accusation wasn't just my mother's anymore. It was the family's official story. I was no longer just an outsider. I was the enemy within. As the last of the guests departed, their headlights cutting paths through the manicured darkness, the core family was ushered into the formal dining room for a private supper. It was not a meal. It was a sentencing. The air was thick with unspoken accusations. We sat around the long, polished mahogany table, the silence broken only by the clinking of silverware against porcelain. My father stared intently at his wineglass as if it held the secrets to the universe. Julian and Charlotte exchanged knowing glances. Chloe wouldn't look at me. Eleanor let the tension build the way a conductor lets silence hang in the air before the final crashing crescendo. Finally, she placed her knife and fork down with a delicate, definitive click. Well, she began dabbing a linen napkin to her perfect lips. Despite a few unfortunate incidents, her eyes locked on mine. I believe the evening was a tremendous success. She thanked Julian for his work with the donors and Charlotte for managing the catering. Then her attention settled on me, a predator finally cornering its prey. Of course, she said, her voice syrupy sweet. Every perfect event can have its minor flaws. Little distractions caused by one person placing their own ego above the well-being of the entire family. This was it. The final act of the trial. I put my own fork down. I had nothing left to lose. It wasn't ego, I said, my voice quiet but clear. It was the truth. That diamond was a lie, and I tried to stop it in the most discreet way possible. My father started to speak, a weak protest forming on his lips. Eleanor, perhaps, the girl, don't she? Commanded, silencing him with a single imperious wave of her hand. She turned her full, formidable attention back to me and laughed a dry, hollow sound. The truth. What could you possibly know about the truth, Audrey? You've always lived in your own dreary little world, always different, always challenging, always a burden. She picked up her wineglass, swirling the deep red liquid. The crystal caught the light of the chandelier, and for a moment, the reflections in her eyes looked like tiny burning flames. I have spent my entire life building this family, building our name, creating something of value, something perfect, she said, her voice dropping to a low, deliberate tone that held more menace than any shout. And if I'm being truly honest, after all these years, I've come to one inescapable conclusion. She paused, letting the silence stretch until it was screaming. Having you! She said, each word a perfectly polished stone dropped into a silent pool, was the single greatest mistake of my life. The silence after my mother's words was not empty. It was heavy, viscous, filling every corner of the dining room like resin, hardening around a trapped insect. The single greatest mistake of my life. Julian leaned back in his chair, lips curling in triumph. Charlotte busied herself with adjusting her napkin, though I saw the flicker of a satisfied smile. Chloe stared at the tablecloth as if willing herself to sink into its folds. My father, ever the ghost, found the bottom of his wineglass fascinating, and Eleanor Mrs. Pierce sat at the head of the table like a queen who had just ordered an execution, certain she had delivered the final blow. But I didn't cry. Instead, I placed my knife and fork together perfectly parallel on the edge of my plate. The steel met with a soft click, deliberate and final. I lifted my water glass, took a measured sip, and set it back down without the slightest tremor. Then I dabbed my lips with a linen napkin. Each movement was slow, controlled, intentional. The opposite of collapse. The opposite of her story. When I finally raised my eyes, I fixed them directly on hers. That's a very interesting assessment, Mrs. Pierce. The title was a scalpel. It cut clean and cold. For the first time all evening, something in her mask shifted a tiny hesitation. That's the truth, she said, recovering quickly, her voice smooth as cut crystal. Truth, I echoed, as if turning the word under a loop. In my profession, truth and value are inseparable, but they are never assumed. They must be tested, inspected, verified objectively. I let my gaze sweep the table, pausing on each face. Tonight, you told a story of a selfless matriarch and a flawed daughter. I think it's only fair we conduct a proper appraisal of that narrative. The word landed like a gavel. Julian's smirk faltered. Chloe glanced up, startled. Even the chandelier above seemed to stop its faint rattling, as if glass itself knew to listen. I folded my hands, calm as a jeweler beginning her report. Let's examine the crown jewel first. I turned to Chloe, softening my tone. Earlier, you asked if the diamond in grandmother's locket was real. I avoided your question then. I won't now. I shifted my gaze back to Eleanor. My voice was clinical, stripped of emotion. It isn't a diamond. It's zirconia synthetic, not natural. I discovered it when I was 15, the day I received my first loop. I told you. And you told me to stay silent. You said, a beautiful lie is better than an ugly truth. That has been this family's core principle ever since appearance, before authenticity. Chloe's face paled. My father closed his eyes briefly, as though bracing against a wave. Eleanor didn't flinch. Julian snorted. You're pathetic. Digging up childhood nonsense at a dinner table. I ignored him. I kept my eyes on Eleanor. That locket is a false origin story, displayed as proof of legacy, when it's really proof of our family's addiction to facades. I let the words hang a moment before continuing. Exhibit 2, recognition. I reached for my phone, opened a file, and slid it into the center of the table, rotating the screen so the others could see. On it gleamed the cover of Forbes Europe, my face, my name, my analysis of the Romanov sapphire. You told Mr. Abernathy tonight. It was just a little mention on their website. A hobby. The truth, I tapped the screen once. It was a feature article. It led to a consulting contract with the Louvre. It expanded my laboratory and established my professional reputation worldwide. You buried it not because it lacked value, but because in your narrative, I am never allowed to surpass Julian. I must remain the struggling daughter, the cautionary tale. Julian leaned forward, jaw tight. You forged that. You'll fake anything for attention. I finally looked at him, calm as ever. If I forged it, then so did the Louvre. You saw the contract, Eleanor. You saw the evidence. You minimized it anyway. Because in your world, only your version of me is permitted. Charlotte lowered her gaze. Chloe blinked rapidly, eyes darting between me and the magazine cover. My father shifted in his chair, lips pressed tight but said nothing. I turned slightly, voice quiet but clear. You all know it. You've known it. But silence has always been more convenient than truth. Eleanor's smile sharpened. Your feelings about your career are not facts. This family doesn't revolve around your wounded ego. I leaned back, folding my arms loosely, a jeweler, pausing before the next finding. No, I said. This family revolves around your wounded fiction. Exhibit 3. The Star of Hope. I let the name settle in the room before continuing. 6 months ago, a client asked me to appraise a necklace 50 carats D, color, on the certificate, flawless on paper. But its history wasn't noble. It came from a mine flagged for human rights violations. The valuation had been inflated. Its chain of custody was corrupted. The very same piece appeared on stage tonight, repackaged by you as a tale of sacrifice and hope. A false provenance turned into theater for donors. I kept my tone clinical, as if reading lab notes. I couldn't expose you publicly without destroying the foundation. So I acted quietly. I sent Mr. Abernathy a discreet caution. That's why the bidding collapsed. Not sabotage, prevention. Eleanor's smile thinned. You humiliated me in front of every person who matters. No, I said. I prevented you from laundering a fraud under the Pierce name. You humiliated yourself. Her eyes narrowed to slits, but she said nothing. I shifted my gaze to the one person who had yet to speak. Dad. He flinched at the word. His hands tightened around the stem of his glass. You received the Forbes issue I sent you. I said gentler now. You called me. Quietly. You told me you were proud. You've seen the truth. You know what I'm saying is real. Please, say it. For a moment, hope flickered. His lips parted. His eyes darted toward my mother, then back to me. Pain swam there, raw and human. But then he lowered his gaze and whispered, Let's not make this worse, Audrey. The words were soft, almost kind, but they were a blade all the same. I felt something settle inside me, a final measurement clicking into place. My last chance for an ally was gone. The ledger closed. I leaned back, hands folded, voice cool and precise. Then the appraisal is complete. Provenance compromised, achievements buried, a fraudulent centerpiece, and a father who confirms the truth yet refuses to defend it. That's the family record. No one moved. No one spoke. Even Julian's smirk had vanished. I exhaled slowly. Now we proceed to final valuation. I rose from my chair. The movement drew every gaze. For once, the room revolved around me. All my life, I treated your approval as the ultimate certification. I thought if I passed every exam you designed, I might finally be deemed worthy. But I was wrong. The value of a stone isn't assigned by the appraiser. It comes from within its density, its resilience, its flaws. I fixed my eyes on Eleanor. You call me a mistake. But I'm not. I'm an inclusion, a visible flaw in the flawless diamond you want to parade before the world. And inclusions matter. They prove authenticity. They separate the genuine from the counterfeit. Her jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw something behind her eyes, not victory, not certainty, fear. I would rather be an emerald with feather cracks running through its heart than a lab-grown diamond. Too perfect to be real, I said. I placed my napkin neatly on the table. So here is my conclusion. This family as an asset is emotionally bankrupt. Beyond restoration, I will no longer invest in it. Julian made a noise, half laugh, half protest. Charlotte stiffened. Chloe's eyes glistened, lips parted in shock. My father sagged further into himself. But Eleanor, her face faltered. For one fleeting second, the mask slipped. She looked not regal, not invincible, but small. I withdraw, I said, my voice carrying clear through the chandeliered hall. From the foundation, from the Pierce family, effective immediately. I turned and walked. My heels struck the marble with calm finality. No one stopped me, not even her. At the far end of the dining hall, the double doors loomed like gates to another world. I pushed them open. Behind me, Julian called my name, fractured and unsure. I didn't look back. The ocean air. The night struck me like a tide. Cold, salt-heavy wind filled my lungs, rinsing away perfume and lies. The Atlantic thundered below, the cliffs, waves colliding with stone in endless, honest violence. I stepped forward into it. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes, steady, unbroken. The stars above were faint, blurred by mist, but they were real. Not curated, not for show. In my clutch, my phone buzzed. I didn't check. I didn't need to. I knew it was one of them already rewriting tonight, already scrambling to control the narrative. Let them. Their version no longer mattered. I inhaled deeply, the ocean air sharp and raw. It filled the hollow spaces that years of silence had carved out. For the first time in my life, I felt whole. I turned toward the horizon. It was black on black now, but I knew what waited morning. I didn't look back at Seacliff Manor. I had appraised it, rendered my verdict, and closed the file. I walked into the darkness, not toward oblivion, but toward a dawn that would belong entirely to me. At the end of it all, I realized strength is not about winning every battle. It's about daring to stand in your truth, even when it costs everything. Sometimes letting go is the beginning of finally finding yourself. That's all for now. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If you've ever felt family can be both shelter and storm, if you've ever struggled between holding on or letting go, or if you simply understand my story and feel it in your own way, just comment, yes. Sharing, listening, or simply being here is already a step toward healing. Until next time, take gentle care of yourself. Remember, healing takes time, but you don't have to do it alone.